Elijah Brooks stood frozen on the stone steps of Crestmore Academy, the grand spires of the private school looming above him like cold sentinels. His shoes, the soles barely clinging to the leather, were no match for the polished brogues clicking past him. His fingers clutched a creased acceptance letter, the edges worn soft from constant reading. The school's name shimmered in gold embossment, as though it belonged to someone else. Next to him, his mother, Ruth Brooks, tightened her grip on his shoulder, her own coat fraying at the cuffs. She stood proud, though exhaustion tugged at her eyes. A woman who had traded sleep for street corners and dignity for daily survival, all to give her son a chance. The heavy oak doors of the school opened, and out stepped Principal Harrington, tall, precise, and brimming with the kind of authority that did not bend. His eyes landed on Elijah and Ruth with a flicker of recognition, then annoyance. Without a word, he took the letter from Elijah's trembling hands, scanned it briefly, and tore it in half with the indifference of a man breaking a twig. The sound, small as it was, cracked something far deeper. This, Harrington said, holding up the torn pieces, was a clerical error. We don't take charity cases. The words hung in the summer air like frost. Ruth stepped forward, her voice low and shaking. Please, sir, we followed everything. He passed the exams. I paid the deposit. That letter said, it said what it shouldn't have. He cut in. Crestmore has a reputation. We can't afford to lower our standards. Around them, the scene unfolded like a cruel performance. Well-dressed parents paused, their designer coats and silk scarves forming a barrier of unspoken judgment. Children in pristine uniforms watched with curious eyes, their hands held by mothers who pulled them a step further away from the embarrassment happening on the steps. Ruth's shoulders sagged as if the weight of every long night at her vending cart had suddenly collapsed onto her back. Elijah looked up at her, saw her lips pressed together to keep from quivering, saw her eyes go glassy but refused to fall. He knew she wouldn't cry. Not here, not now. He wanted to scream, to demand the future they had worked for, but all that came was a choked breath, a heat rising behind his eyes. And in that moment, amidst the silence and staring faces, Elijah made a promise he didn't fully understand, only that it rose from somewhere deep, forged in anger and shame. I'll build my own school one day, he whispered. Ruth looked down at him, startled, but she saw something shift in her son's face. Something hardened. The principal turned and walked back into the building, the doors shutting with a finality that echoed like a gavel. Elijah didn't move. He stared at those doors, his hands clenched, the torn letter flapping at his feet like a fallen flag. And behind him, the sun caught the shimmer of 1,000 golden school emblems, none of which were made for him. Not yet. 10 years had passed, but Elijah Brooks still walked the same cracked sidewalks, the same narrow alleys littered with broken glass and the scent of fried oil from corner vendors. At 22, his hands were calloused from long days, hauling cinder blocks and mixing cement on construction sites that built futures for other people, people with names, with legacies, with open doors. By night, he crouched beneath a rusted overpass on the edge of the neighborhood, tutoring children whose eyes mirrored the same hunger he once carried. He brought them stolen chalk from demolished schools, scraps of worn-out books, and belief what little of it he still had left. Home was still the same one-bedroom apartment he'd grown up in. The wallpaper peeled in corners, the faucet leaked, like it was crying, and the air carried the faint scent of bleach and stale coffee. His mother Ruth now coughed with the tight wheeze of someone who had gone to many years without proper care. The street vending had stopped when her knees gave out. She rarely left the bed now, though she always asked him about the kids. "How are your little scholars today?" she'd say, her voice raspy but proud. He always smiled and told her they were learning fast. What he didn't tell her was that every day felt like running into a brick wall with nothing but bare fists and stubborn hope. Asterisk. He passed Crestmore Academy every morning on his way to the job site. The school had grown taller, shinier, its marble facade now framed by manicured hedges and iron gates with golden crests. The laughter of students drifted through the bars, soft and polished, a world apart from the concrete grind he lived in. Each time he walked by, he felt the old words. Echo, we don't take charity cases. The memory had never faded, not the principal's sneer, not the sound of paper tearing in his hands, not the weight of his mother's silence afterward. It had carved itself into him. Asterisk, the nights were harder. Sometimes he dreamed of children, pressed against locked school doors, banging, shouting, their small fists bruising against glass. In every dream, he saw himself 12 again, standing behind them, unable to open the doors, watching their faces blur with disappointment as they disappeared into the dark. Asterisk, it was under the East Side Bridge, hunched over a milk crate with a whiteboard propped on bricks, that Miss Halley first saw him. A soft-spoken woman in her 30s. She volunteered with a local NGO that provided food and resources to underserved neighborhoods. She had come to drop off donated winter coats. When she spotted Elijah, chalk in hand, explaining algebra to a cluster of kids sitting cross-legged on the cold concrete, she watched quietly, long enough to see the discipline in his methods, the way the children clung to every word. But she also saw the tension in his jaw, the shadows under his eyes. There was passion in him, yes, but also fire, the kind that burned bridges as quickly as it lit torches. Asterisk, after the lesson, she approached him. "You're a good teacher," she said simply. Asterisk, Elijah had shrugged. "They listen. That's half the job." Asterisk, "They listen because they trust you," she replied, handing him a clipboard of resources. "There are ways to build more than this. Grants, partnerships." Asterisk, he tried not to hope. Hope had teeth. But later that week, he filled out the application. For a city education grant, hours spent crafting essays, scanning the kids' letters, explaining his work. He dared to believe, just a little. When the rejection letter came, it was polite, clinical, lack of formal credentials, no academic degree, no institutional affiliation. It said everything and nothing, the message clear, not good enough, not. One of us, asterisk Elijah, sat in the stairwell of his building that night. The letter crumpled in his fist, his mother's cough echoing faintly behind the thin walls. Around him, the city pulsed with opportunity for others, those who had never been told to wait outside. He had done everything they said, worked hard, stayed out of trouble, gave back. But to them, he was still just a construction worker with a past, teaching math under a bridge. Asterisk, and yet, the kids still came. Rain or shine, tired or not, they waited for him each evening like he was their compass. That was the part no grant committee saw, how much he already was what they claimed. To invest in, not a project. A movement, asterisk, but inside, Elijah couldn't shake the question that returned with each closed door. What more do they want before I'm allowed in? Asterisk for the first time in years, Elijah allowed himself to feel something dangerously close to hope. The invitation had come in a sleek black envelope, embossed with gold. Darius Parker's personal gala for social tech innovation. Elijah almost didn't believe it when he opened it. Darius, his childhood friend, now a Silicon Valley prodigy with venture capital in his back pocket and followers in the millions, had reached out of nowhere. "Come, pitch your idea," the message read. "Let's build something real." Asterisk, Elijah spent the next 2 weeks pouring everything he had into the presentation every sleepless night. Every lesson taught under flickering streetlights. Every face of every child he had mentored. He borrowed a friend's laptop, learned basic design, and crafted a passionate visual pitch for modular container schools, mobile classrooms, equipped with solar panels and digital libraries that could be transported to underserved neighborhoods. "If they won't let us through the doors," he said in the voiceover, "we'll bring the classroom to them." Asterisk, the night of the gala, he wore his best thrift store blazer, pressed 3 times to hide the threadbare sleeves. The venue was a glass cathedral downtown, filled with men in tailored suits and women with practiced smiles. But Elijah didn't flinch. His kids were there too, a few from his tutoring circle, cleaned up and wide-eyed, proud to be witnesses. When it was his turn on stage, Elijah stepped up, heart-pounding but voice steady, and gave everything. He spoke of broken systems, of children with locked doors in their dreams. He spoke of his mother, of the bridge, of the time a little girl solved an equation before knowing how to spell her name. Asterisk, when it ended, the room fell silent for a moment, then erupted into applause. Darius stood, grinning ear to ear, and pulled him into a hug in front of the crowd. "This is what we need," he said. "I'll fund it. We're gonna change the world, E." For the first time since he was 12, Elijah felt like maybe he was no longer on the outside looking in. A month passed. No contracts, no calls. At first, Elijah told himself Darius was busy, that big things took time. But then, one morning, the news alert lit up his cracked phone screen. Darius Parker launches mobile classroom revolution. A new era in tech education begins. His face wasn't in the article, his name wasn't anywhere, but the renderings were identical to his deck. Even the tagline, "Education where they are," was lifted word for word. Asterisk, Elijah stared at the screen, numb, before rage bubbled up and over. He found Darius at his office downtown, a sleek building made of glass and steel. He didn't bother with the front desk. He walked straight in. Darius, lounging behind a desk that looked like it cost more than Elijah's yearly rent, barely looked surprised. Asterisk, "You stole it," Elijah said, his voice low and shaking. "You looked me in the eye, and you stole everything." Asterisk, Darius leaned back, folding his arms. "Relax, E, it's not stealing, it's scaling." Asterisk, Elijah blinked, disbelieving. "You took my idea. The work, the kids, you knew what it meant." Asterisk, Darius stood, walking over with a sigh. "Look," he said, almost gently, "ideas are free. You've got heart, no doubt, but heart doesn't move markets. People don't invest in nobodies. They invest in people like me." Asterisk, Elijah stepped back as if struck. Darius clapped him on the shoulder, smile flickering like it was supposed to comfort. "You should be proud. Your dream's out there now." Asterisk, but it wasn't his anymore. It never would be. Asterisk, that night, Ruth collapsed in the kitchen. Elijah found her on the floor, lips slack, one side of her face drooping, breath shallow. The hospital lights were sterile and cold. The doctor's voice to CALM, a stroke, serious. They needed to start treatment immediately, but the bills came fast, first in estimates, then in threats. Elijah had no savings, no insurance, no backup. Asterisk, he sat alone in the waiting room, her bracelet clutched in his fist, watching people walk by in clean shoes and quiet confidence. In the span of days, he had lost his dream, his dignity, and maybe the one person who had ever truly believed in him. Asterisk, there was no letter to rip this time, just silence, and the searing certainty that no one was coming to save him. Asterisk, Elijah drifted through the weeks that followed, as if underwater, heavy, muffled, and far from anything resembling air. The vibrant energy that once powered him, that had lit the nights under the bridge and filled his voice with fire at the gala, was gone. He stopped showing up to the overpass. The chalkboard lay unused, a layer of dust forming over equations never written. The kids waited at first, confused. Then they slowly stopped coming. Wordless goodbyes hung in the cold air. Elijah stayed inside, eyes fixed on nothing, moving only to visit his mother at the rehab center, where she was relearning how to speak with half her mouth paralyzed. She smiled for him, tried to joke, but it only made the weight on his chest grow heavier. Asterisk, you're not eating, Ruth rasped one day, reaching out her trembling fingers to his. You look hollow. Asterisk, he didn't reply, just stared out the window, the skyline beyond it dotted with buildings he would never own, lights from towers funded by stolen dreams. Asterisk, you don't get to quit, she said suddenly, her voice steadier than it had been in weeks. He looked at her, startled. You carry too many children in your shadow, Elijah. If you stop walking, they go dark too. Asterisk, her words struck like thunder. For a moment, they didn't heal anything, but they cracked the silence in him, just enough for breath to seep through. Asterisk, days later. Miss Halley found him sitting outside the clinic, bags under his eyes, and no fire left in his frame. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. Instead, she handed him a flyer, hand-drawn, crumpled at the corners. We're starting a grassroots learning program down in Sector 9. The slums near the rail yard. It's messy, there's no money, but the kids are waiting. We need someone who knows what it is to teach without chalkboards. Asterisk, he wanted to say no. He had nothing left to give. But her eyes didn't judge, and the paper in his hand trembled like a second chance. He showed up that weekend, asterisk the learning. Center was a broken shipping container with no insulation and holes in the roof. But the kids were there, bright-eyed, barefoot, curious. Elijah taught them how to add with bottle caps, drew fractions in the dirt, and read them stories using voices that made them laugh. Something sparked inside him again. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was momentum. Asterisk Miss Halley, watching from a distance, took out her phone one afternoon and quietly recorded a moment. Elijah, barefoot like the children, kneeling in the dirt as he showed a group of 6 how to multiply using lines and stones. His voice was full of joy, his hands animated, the kids hanging on to every number like magic. She posted it online with a simple caption, "Learning finds a way. Meet Mr. Elijah Brooks." Asterisk, the video exploded. Not overnight, not in a deluge, but slowly. Thousands of shares, then tens of thousands. Comments poured in, admiration, donations, offers of supplies, second-hand books, and messages from teachers around the country. Elijah had no PR team, no agency, just the truth. And people recognized it. Asterisk with the money trickling in. He bought an old shipping container, patched it up, painted the sides with murals the kids designed. He called it Root School, a nod to where it all began, where things grew from the soil of struggle. It wasn't polished, but it was alive. Children returned. Volunteers joined. The community embraced it like a heartbeat. Asterisk, but the celebration didn't last long. Within weeks, city officials arrived with clipboards and stiff suits. This facility is unregulated, they said. You're not certified to operate a school. You could face fines. Asterisk Elijah stood there, the same fire rekindled in his eyes, and refused to move the desks. Parents gathered, dozens at first, then hundreds, holding signs scrawled in marker. Let our children learn. He teaches what you forgot. Reporters showed up. Cameras rolled. The confrontation reached headlines. Asterisk when asked for comment. Elijah faced the camera directly, voice clear and unshaking. You failed me, he said, the children standing behind him, but I will never fail these kids. Asterisk that night, the clip aired nationwide. Debates raged. News anchors dissected it. He became both hero and target. Asterisk and then, as if summoned by the rising tide of attention, Darius reappeared, not with congratulations, but with a lawsuit. Branding infringement, the claim read. Elijah had used a name too close to Darius's Mobile Revolution initiative. The legal team demanded he cease operations immediately. Asterisk the betrayal twisted deeper. Darius wasn't just trying to erase him now, he was trying to destroy what Elijah had rebuilt from ash. But this time, Elijah wasn't alone. The streets rose with him. Mothers and fathers, teachers, former students, celebrities retweeted the clip. Crowdfunding exploded. Asterisk Elijah stood at the edge of a storm, bloodied by the system, betrayed by a brother, but no longer in silence. He had no suit, no investors, but he had something purer. Children who believed in him, a mother who reminded him of his worth, and a nation suddenly watching. Asterisk the fire that once burned quietly now blazed, and Elijah, scarred, unyielding, refused to let it die again. Asterisk the courtroom buzzed with quiet tension, rows filled with reporters, community members, and curious onlookers who had followed the story from whispers under a bridge to headlines. On national news, at the plaintiff's table sat Darius Parker in a tailored suit, his legal team flanking him like armor, stacks of glossy documentation lined up with precision. Across the room, Elijah Brooks stood alone at the defendant's table, wearing a borrowed blazer and shoes worn at the heels, clutching a folder that looked far too thin to stand against the firepower across from him. Asterisk the judge, a silver woman with sharp eyes, glanced over her glasses and began proceedings. Darius's lawyer launched into a polished opening statement, full of buzzwords and legal jargon, presenting charts and branding comparisons, painting Elijah's project as an opportunistic knockoff of an original technological initiative. Darius barely looked at Elijah Ranley when smiling for the cameras. Asterisk when it was Elijah's turn, he rose slowly. No speechwriters, no rehearsed lines, just his voice. Rough around the edges, but honest. I'm not a lawyer, he began, and I don't have a degree, but I have a story. He told the courtroom everything of standing outside Crestmore Academy at 12, holding an acceptance letter that was torn in half by a man who believed poverty meant unworthiness, of his mother's sacrifices, vending under sun and rain. to give him a chance that never came. Of the kids under the bridge, learning with bottle caps, because that's all they had. He spoke of the night Darius hugged him like a brother, then vanished with his dream and turned it into a tech startup. Pitch. They said I didn't have the power to make things happen, but I had the children, I had the streets, I had the belief that even if the system forgets us, we don't have to forget ourselves. A silence fell over the courtroom, thick and Reverend Ms. Halley stood next and handed the judge a packet-dated proposal drafts, student letters written in crayon and pencil, time-stamped videos, and the viral clip of Elijah teaching barefoot children to multiply in the dirt. This wasn't a product, she said simply. This was a lifeline. The judge flipped through the documents slowly. The room waited. Then she looked up at Elijah, her expression unreadable at first. Mr. Brooks, she said, this case was filed on the grounds of intellectual property theft. She paused, letting the tension settle. But what you've done is build something the system failed to create. Something real, human, and necessary. She set the papers down. Case dismissed. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Darius rose sharply, face tight, whispering furiously to his lawyers as cameras flashed and murmurs swelled into a roar. One by one, his sponsors began to release statements, distancing themselves from the controversy. The illusion cracked. The genius entrepreneur exposed, not as a visionary, but as a thief of dreams too humble to patent. Elijah stood frozen, stunned by the weight of the moment. As he stepped outside, a crowd waited, parents, former students, strangers who had seen themselves in his story. They clapped, they cried, they embraced him like he was no longer a footnote in someone else's success, but a chapter all his own. That night, news of the ruling spread far beyond the city. The clip of Elijah's testimony, raw, trembling, unfiltered, went viral again, this time across borders. Messages poured in from Brazil, India, South Africa, from educators and non-profits and children watching on phones in dusty classrooms. An international NGO reached out with a proposal to help expand Root School globally, offering resources, training, and a partnership founded on equity, not exploitation. Back at the hospital, Ruth sat propped up in bed, a blanket tucked gently over her legs. A nurse turned on the small TV mounted on the wall, just in time for the clip of Elijah outside the courthouse, surrounded by children holding handmade signs. He believed in us. Her fingers curled against the bedsheets, and tears slipped silently down her cheeks. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her boy had done what the world said he never would. Not just survived, but triumphed, with his name, his truth, and his fire intact. 2 years had passed, and the name Elijah Brooks now meant something beyond his neighborhood. Root schools had spread like quiet revolution. 5 of them nestled in low-income corners of the city, each built from salvaged containers and painted with hope. What began under a bridge had become a network of learning sanctuaries where children once forgotten now solved algebra, wrote essays, and passed national exams with pride. A few students had even begun applying to college, some the first in their families to finish high school. Their successes weren't headline-making spectacles. They were quiet victories, report cards posted on fridges, acceptance letters, read aloud at dinner tables, dreams dared in full sentences. Elijah still lived in the same apartment, though it had been repainted and refurbished thanks to community volunteers. He didn't wear suits, didn't drive a fancy car, didn't carry the air of a man with accolades, because none of it had ever been about him. Each morning, he walked the same familiar route to one of the root schools, his footsteps passing over scars of the past now softened by time. And then, one day, he paused outside a gate that once held back his future, Crestmore Academy. The spires still reached toward the sky, but the windows were dark. A rusting chain and a property of the state sign hung from the locked gate. Closed permanently, the news had said something about financial scandal, corruption, mismanagement, and a sharp drop in enrollment. Elijah stared at it for a long while, then turned away, not with bitterness, but with a quiet breath of release. The place that once crushed him was now just a hollow monument to a broken system. Asterisk now. His classrooms were filled with students who looked like he once had, wide-eyed, worn, curious. He taught them not just math and science, but leadership. He spoke to them about courage and community, about how power isn't something you're given, but something you build. Ironically, some of the teens sitting in his class bore the last names of men who had once sneered at his mother on the school steps all those years ago. But they listened, not because of guilt, but because Elijah never taught with resentment, only with truth. Asterisk Ruth Brooks, now in a wheelchair, never missed a school opening. She rolled across freshly paved sidewalks and posed beside murals painted by children, her hands cutting bright red ribbons while her eyes shimmered with pride. People would come to thank Elijah, to shake his hand, but he always turned and gestured. To her, she started this. He'd say, "I'm just carrying it forward," and she would smile, lips pressed tight against tears, her silence saying everything. Asterisk Ms. Halley remained at his side, though not in the way others expected. There was no romance, no labels, just a friendship so deep and unwavering it could hold the weight of past and future both. She had been the first to see through his pain to his purpose, and now she stood as his fiercest advocate, collaborator, and equal. They shared coffee in the early mornings before the students arrived, sometimes speaking, sometimes not, the kind of connection that needed no proving. Asterisk, the root schools didn't make national headlines anymore. They didn't need to. Their success was measured not in fame but in future's each child who walked through their doors a quiet defiance against the odds. And Elijah, no longer haunted by locked gates or courtroom battles, had become what no system could deny him, a builder, a guide, and a legacy maker, not with noise, but with roots. Asterisk, the afternoon sun filtered through the windows of the modest office, casting long, warm streaks across Elijah's desk. He sat alone, a cup of cold tea beside him, holding a folded piece of paper that trembled slightly in his calloused hands. The handwriting was uneven, written in pencil on lined paper, a letter from one of his very first students, now in her final year of high school. "Because of you, I believe I matter," it read. "You taught me more than math. You taught me that my life has value, even when the world said it didn't." Elijah leaned back, blinking against the heat behind his eyes, the weight of her words sinking into the space that had once been filled with doubt. Asterisk, he stood slowly, tucking the letter into his pocket like something sacred. Down the hall, the sound of laughter and chalk on board pulled him forward. As he opened the classroom door, 40 children stood up in unison, eyes bright with expectation. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks," they shouted, voices full of energy, of trust, of something Elijah had once thought forever lost. Asterisk, he paused in the doorway, the corner of his mouth curling into a quiet, almost disbelieving smile. He saw their faces, different names, different dreams, but all of them watching him like he belonged here, because he did. He wasn't a guest in this world anymore. He had built it. Asterisk, the boy who had once stood on school steps with a torn letter and broken faith had found his way into classrooms filled with love, respect, and purpose. Not because a door had been opened for him, but because he had made a new door for others. Asterisk, and as the children took their seats and the lesson began, Elijah took a breath deep in his chest, steady and full. Asterisk, I wasn't rejected, he thought, watching the room come alive. I was rerouted.